This is the final video lecture on content, where I'm going to go through reliability and validity, and also a few details about sampling that were not covered in the Khan Academy video. So these are the learning objectives that are covered in this particular video, though some aspects of this are also covered in the textbook as well. We're talking about research design, reliability and validity, the role of theory, cross-sectional versus longitudinal research, and also snowball sampling. So we're interested in the quality of data gathered. Using a good instrument for collecting quantitative data, which we're focusing on this week, will improve the quality of data gathered. So I want to introduce two concepts. One is this idea of reliability, which refers to the stability or consistency of measurement. The idea of the same thing being measured every time. All items are consistent with each other. And the other is validity, which is the accuracy of measurement. Is it getting at the truth? So another way to think about it, can the variable be measured consistently each time? Do repeated measures yield the same results? And also this idea of the operational definition, does it match the concept it was meant to measure? So I'll give you an example of reliability. So a measure is reliable, consistent, if we get the same or similar response over and over again. Okay. So let's say that somebody's weighing themselves. Okay. And let's say the doctor's scale, the scale of the doctor's office, represents the truth. And at home, they have two scales. Scale A, they weigh themselves three times in a row, right? Their weight hasn't changed. Home scale A gives them 40 pounds, 41 pounds, and 39 pounds. Now, obviously, this is very different than the truth, which is 100 pounds. But this scale is reliable. It gives similar responses over and over again. Okay. Scale B gives first time 90 pounds, then 120 pounds, and 80 pounds. So it's closer to the truth, but it's not very reliable. You're getting different results each time. Another way to think of it, and this will work for some people, but might not work for others. When I first saw this, I was like, okay, what? I don't understand. But perhaps this bullseye drawing will be helpful for you. Okay. So the first one on the far left, it is this idea that if the truth is the center of the bullseye, right? All of these little, your arrows, right, or your bullets, they are far from the center. They're far from the truth, but they're grouped together, so they're reliable. Okay? The second one, they're kind of all over the place, but they're closer to the truth than they were in the first one, okay? The one on the left. And then we go to the far right, and they're both grouped together and close to the center, close to the bullseye. They're both valid and reliable, right? So we're interested as researchers, we care about both reliability and validity. One specific aspect or definition or concept of construct validity, right? So validity overall, right? Is it getting at the truth? Is it measuring what it was supposed to measure? And this specific concept is referred to as construct validity, right? So asking somebody, we might think, asking somebody how frequently they attend religious services, we think that's a pretty good indication of a person's religiosity. Pretty good indication of how religious we think they are. Right? I could also argue that asking someone how many hours they worked last month is a good measure of employment status, right? I have a good sense this is getting at, measures what it was supposed to measure. This is logical, this makes sense. So, think about these two. Is the measure, is it reliable or not? Is it valid or not? Okay. So let's say I ask you, first one, as a measure of the strength of family ties, of how close you are to your family, I ask you 2 weeks in a row, in February, how many times did you call or text your mom? So is this reliable? Is this valid? So I would argue that in terms of validity, that's pretty good, right? How close you are to your family based on how often you contact them, right? Assuming, let's say this is assuming you don't live nearby, right? But calling or texting them. But I'm a little skeptical about the reliability, right? How do you, like, if I honestly asked you that question, can you really know, right? Do you really remember how many times did you call or text someone? And maybe there's a way to look it up on your phone record if it's from a cell phone, but can I just ask you that question? You won't be able to answer it. So I would argue that it's valid, but it's not reliable. What if we're interested in knowing how hard of a worker a student is? So we ask them how many credits they're taking this semester. And we ask them both on a Monday and on a Friday. So I think that if I asked you how many credits, well, summer is a little trickier, but maybe it's trickier to summer session 1, summer session 2, but let's say it's fall semester. I bet that you could tell me how many credits you're taking, and that your answer wouldn't change if it's the middle of the semester from one day to another. But I don't think this has a lot of construct validity, right? Because overall, people tend to take similar numbers of credits, but that doesn't necessarily measure that they're a hard worker. Okay, so being cognizant of these things. All right, so ways to improve reliability. One thing you might come across in when you're reading research articles is test retest, right? So you ask somebody something more than once and you see if it is consistent, right? So, and generally this is something that we would expect to be stable, right? So let's say we have a instrument that's measuring people's personality types, and that's something we expect to be, for the average person, to be pretty stable over time. So we test them 1 week, and then we have them retake the instrument, and we see if they got the same results. So how is that test retest reliability? Another thing you might come across is something called intercoder reliability, right? So sometimes we have people that might rate things, and do they rate them in a consistent way? So I think I'll give you an example, and this will make a bit more sense. So there's a study called the Wisconsin Longitudinal Study. And one of the things that they looked at, which I think is pretty interesting, is this is people who graduated from high school in 1957 in Wisconsin. And they had raters look at their high school yearbook photos and rate them on attractiveness on a scale from 1 to 11. And they found that there were multiple raters, both men and women, and that they tended to agree with each other. People tended to assign similar scores, right? So we don't know if that's the truth, right? What is the true attractiveness? But we know that people, inter-rater reliability, or what's called intercoder reliability, that people tended to rate things the same. People agreed with each other. So just to review, with measurement, we want people to respond accurately and truthfully, which is validity, and we want respondents to respond consistently, reliability. So another way to think about, and this is more to improve validity, is to avoid reactivity. And reactivity is this idea that people will alter their performance or alter their behavior because of an awareness that they're being observed. Right? So one way to do this, if it's like a survey or an interview, is to develop rapport, right? Develop trust, develop reciprocal relationships, develop understanding between people. They'll feel more relaxed and they'll respond more honestly. Another way would be to get participants accustomed to your presence, right? So when I've taught this course before, people talk about going to a classroom, going to an early childhood classroom and observing the kids, but you don't record what you observed the first couple days when they were surprised to see you and maybe they were acting differently than they normally would. You need to get them accustomed to your presence and then do some observations. Another thing you might come across is interviewer bias, right? So whether it's an interview or somebody giving a face-to-face survey, that the interviewer shouldn't be biased, right? Shouldn't respond to their responses with a smile or frown. They should try to be as neutral as possible, because the interviewer influencing the results is going to affect validity. Similarly, there's also this concept of social desirability bias. So responding to questions, the person who's taking a survey, let's say, responds to questions in a way that would reflect favorably on them, right? Putting their best foot forward rather than answering truthfully, maybe responding in a socially acceptable way, right? So if you think about asking somebody about maybe things that are perceived as bad behavior, right? Asking people about drug use or sexual activity, right? So how do we deal with this? Maybe there's a way to assure them that their data will be confidential, right? Think back to research ethics. Maybe we don't ask all these sensitive questions face to face. Maybe we sort of start with easier questions as we get into it and then ask some of these tougher questions towards the end. So the other thing I want you to be aware of, because certainly this will come up in your research articles, is thinking about the time dimension of studies. This is a little bit different than thinking about reliability and validity. So we can think about research as two broad types. Cross-sectional research, which collects data at one point in time, it's a snapshot, and longitudinal data that studies something over an extended period of time. And I think in human development, we're going to be more interested in what's called a panel study, right? So studying the same group of people each time. So studying kids when they're ages 5 and 10 and 15 and seeing how they change over time. But you might also come across what's called a trend study, which is, looking at, okay, what was people's opinion in 1990, in 1992 and 94, right? So we might be asking a different group of people, but we're kind of getting a sense of how things change over time. So in a way, it's kind of like repeating a cross-sectional study. Okay? So oftentimes when you see things about opinion polls, right? What do Americans' opinions are of a certain topic in different years, and they're not necessarily talking to the same people as they would in a panel study, but we're looking for trends over time. The other video in the textbook already talked about probability versus non-probability sampling, but I want to introduce you to one more type of non-probability sampling, which is called snowball sampling. So this is sort of a type of purposive sampling where you ask the original respondents to refer their friends to be in the study. And this is often used for what's called hard-to-reach populations. Right? So maybe homeless people, maybe drug users, maybe prostitutes, sex workers. And we can't use a simple random sample. We can't use probability sampling techniques because we don't have a list of these people. They are hard, and we might not run across them. They're hard to find, so then we use this snowball sampling technique. I want to just review this because this is something that students have struggled a bit with in the past, which is thinking about research designs in general. And experimental research we'll cover in a later week.